Hello. For this project, I analyzed three different research models. The first one I analyzed was Susan Osman's Give Me Five research model. I also took a look at the research project calculator model, which was created for Minnesota secondary schools and university, as well as the Stripling model of inquiry created by Barbara Stripling. I found all models to contain steps necessary for success in the research process, both from the students' perspectives of completing the research and the teachers' perspectives of guiding students through the process. The following information presented will look more closely at each model with an ultimate determination about which model is most suitable for the Waukee Community School District. The first model I looked at was the Give Me Five research model. It contains 5 steps, the first one being questioning, followed by locating, note-taking, writing, and then evaluating. I felt that the strengths of this model were that there were only 5 steps. It doesn't appear to be daunting or cumbersome to both teachers and students. The steps are sequential, building off of one another, and they can also be easily adapted to various grade levels and content areas. I did, however, feel that it overlooked a couple of things. While it is sequential, it's also quite linear. It doesn't necessarily show inquiry as a process where one moves back and forth between steps, depending on the research that they're gathering, different opinions that they may be forming, or conclusions that are coming up. I also felt that it wasn't necessarily true to the inquiry process, as it starts right away with a research question formed instead of getting into research and developing that question later on after they've explored a little bit. I also noted that step 4 is worded as the writing step, and I felt that this kind of put students into a certain box where this was the only way that they could show their learning. I'd like to see that worded perhaps more as a production or expression step, so it's less restrictive. I did feel that it values organization. It also gives way for the workshop model of instruction. Students have a lot of control in this, as well as teachers. It's really kind of a joint task between the two, where teachers are leading them through the process with particular mini lessons and direct instructions at certain points, but then really turning the students loose to independently practice what they are learning. I did feel like it assumes students work through the research process in a linear fashion, and after they have developed that initial research question, they don't necessarily need to go back and make changes, which more often than not we do need to do. I do feel that there were some room for social aspects through this. Students with the workshop model of instruction going on through this and then applying it to their topics. There were many times where students could build in, whether working in groups or by themselves, just practicing some of the skills together before working through it on their own. Depending on that publication of their product as well, that could be a social aspect. I felt like overall this is more product oriented. The activities that the students are given to complete at each step tend to lead it towards that final product. There is the evaluation step at the end for them to go back and think about what they did, the product as well as the process, but there isn't necessarily a lot of time for that reflection and thinking throughout. Therefore, I did feel like it was more product oriented. I did feel like the steps in this process are worded very clearly. It's in a manner that is not confusing. The vocabulary of the steps are written so that they are accessible to various grade levels. And I do like that the note-taking step and the locating step are separate. I feel that these are very important in and of themselves steps, because just the fact of finding it doesn't mean that I'm pulling out the information that answers my question. So I did like that they gave special attention to each of those steps. The second model that I looked at was the research project calculator model. This is very similar to the Give Me Five model. A lot of the wording for the steps are essentially the same. Step 3 looks a little bit different, where it's already in the conclude step, but the question, the gathering, the communicating, the evaluating, those are very similar to the Give Me Five. I feel like the pros of this one are that each step had guiding questions to go along with it. They also had a specific task that it asked students to complete at the end. For example, at the end of the questioning step, they should write a specific research question or a hypothesis. After the gathering step, they should create a bibliography or works cited page and record notes from their sources. So it kept them on track. It gave them a goal to work towards. They also had organizers available on their website that could be modified for a particular class or grade level's needs. I did feel like this one, some of the things that were overlooked, much like the last one, it was set up as steps, so it was kind of assumed that these must be followed to achieve a particular task, whereas a model or a system are more there as an example or a way to process through the information. This one too, much like the last one, also starts with a question instead of getting into the process and then determining a question a little bit later on. I thought the gathering step too was, it incorporates the note taking, and as I mentioned in the last one, I think that those are two important skills. Gathering and evaluating are one thing, and then actually going through and taking out the information and how to appropriately take notes and record what I need are two big things. So I like seeing those separate and giving them the attention that they deserve. I felt like with this one, importance is placed upon organization and setting goals for each step to accomplish. I also did feel like the workshop model of instruction was also applicable through each of these steps. With this, I felt like students had control over their research topic, but I felt like the teacher was more so the one that was kind of dictating the steps and the tasks that needed to be accomplished. So not as much autonomy with this one as I would say there are with others. I also think that this one, like the Give Me 5, assumes that students will work through the process in a linear fashion. They're not going to need a whole lot of revisions. Once they have that question done, they'll just be able to zip through the process. And in many times, that is certainly not the case. I do feel like there is some room for social interaction with this, especially with the communicating step, depending on whether or not they are doing the process of research themselves or if they are doing it with others. That, of course, would also lead for social aspects. With this, it seems, though, like it's intended for more personal use, so not necessarily as much of the social aspect to it. This one, because it had a specific goal at each step, I felt like it was quite process-oriented. Each step, they were to complete a particular item, whether it was a physical product or whether it was just something for a teacher to check. It was very product-oriented. I did, though, appreciate having those mini goals, just thinking about some of the students that we have who aren't necessarily as self-motivated to get things done. Those will help keep them on track and just kind of thinking, where should I be at this point? What should I be accomplishing? The last model that I looked at was the Stripling model of inquiry. This, to me, was the most true to the inquiry process, as it was set up in a cycle that students move through fluidly, revisiting steps as needed based on the information that they find throughout the process. It, as I mentioned, set up in phases of connecting, wondering, investigating, constructing, expressing, and reflecting. And this next slide, you'll see what that looks like, and you'll see the arrows pointing both ways allow for students to move back and forth depending on where they're at. It also has a couple of more in-depth I guess, points of this is what I should be doing at this point in the model, and I can move forward, but if needed, I can certainly go back. With this one, there isn't necessarily as much explicit instruction built into each of the certain skills. For example, note-taking, like with the Give Me 5 one, there were pretty explicit lessons that you could do with that. But definitely this one has catered more to the student learning process and their curiosity, letting them take it and make it their own. That expression state, I also appreciate that it allows them to show their learning in any way that they want to. It's not specifically needed to be in a written format or in a way that the teacher has determined. To me, this one seems to be a model that reflects guided inquiry, where the teacher is more of a facilitator and a coach, but not necessarily the one that is leading the charge and telling the students what they should be accomplishing each day. So for me, this one is very much student-controlled learning. They're determining where am I at, what do I need to accomplish. Some assumptions with this are that students are, pretty self-motivated, and that when given the freedom of a research topic, they'll be fully engaged. For many students, absolutely, this will keep them engaged if they're able to get into something that they themselves choose. For others, something a little bit more structured, like the first two that were mentioned, may help them keep themselves on task a little bit better. I felt like with this one, there's a lot of student autonomy, so it just trusts them to select that topic, really takes into account their feelings in the process. They're able to go back and check themselves when needed. I don't need to rush myself to the end and feel like I am struggling and frustrated and overwhelmed. I can go back and catch myself where I need to possibly make some changes. I do feel like with this one, there's a lot of opportunities for social engagement. This one to me seems like, because I'm going through it so autonomously, I'm going to have a constant need to bounce ideas off of each other, reflect, share, with the teacher, with other classmates, with other teachers who may be in the room working on this process with students. So lots of opportunities for social aspects. Of all of the three models that I looked at, I feel like this one is the most process-oriented due to how it's set up as a cycle of phases instead of the steps like the other two models that I have looked at previously. I think that lots of opportunities for reflection going back, so certainly more process-oriented. And I do feel like this one encourages students to not just arrive at one final answer to a research question, but rather discover other questions as they go and areas of interest that in the future they could also investigate. So as I looked at all of the models today, I felt like they all have aspects that would be appropriate to various learners depending on the level of structure and guidance that they need when researching. When thinking about Waukee Community School District and the building that I am in, all of the work that we've done over the years around the inquiry process, I feel like we're at a point where the stripling model of inquiry would be the best one to meet the needs of our curriculum as well as student needs. Not only does it allow students to pursue areas about which they are passionate, but it also fosters an appreciation and awareness of each of the students' individual learning processes and styles. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it was informative. I know it certainly was for me.